You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Park Ranger Locked On Coogs here. It was a big weekend for the Big 12. Some big results. The biggest of which, as far as the national audience is concerned, is Texas Tech beating Utah. Now, with Iowa State idle this weekend, these were the two top Big 12 teams in action, and Texas Tech put a thumping on by the end of it. Baron Morton, starting quarterback, went out. Talks about him getting Wally pipped and Will Hammond and stuff coming out. I watched this one pretty closely, mostly because Tech is the next Big 12 opponent for Houston. It was a game that was on. I also watched some Oregon and Oregon State, but that ended up being a little bit more of a blowout a little bit earlier. And honestly, look, I watched this game and I tweeted out, there is no one I see on Houston's schedule that Houston cannot beat, right? Like there's no one that's going to take a miracle into this and that. No one on the schedule is like that. However, I'll admit, I watched that game happen and thought Tech looked pretty good. By the end of it, the Hammond guy raised an interesting question. Do you go with the Wally Pipp theory and play Hammond as the better quarterback option? Do you stick with Baron Morton? Do you think that Will Hammond played better because that's what Utah, not what Utah game planned for? Is his ceiling higher? Whose floor is higher? Which is more important? That's all stuff for them to figure out in Lubbock. That ain't my problem, right? I also have to admit that by the end of the game, I was thinking a lot about last college football season, not necessarily because of Texas Tech, although Utah was involved, but early in that season, we saw Oklahoma State hosting Utah, and it was the 2023 runner-up in the Big 12, Oklahoma State, hosting the Pac-12 defending champion that no longer had anything to defend because the Pac-12 was gone in Utah. And Oklahoma State had beaten Arkansas, and Utah had already beaten Baylor, and it was technically a non-conference matchup earlier in the season. And the thought was that when Utah won that game in Stillwater, that they are going to come in and run this whole conference. And Oklahoma State now has an uphill battle. They still have this path to Arlington and so on and so forth. And Oklahoma State went on to not win a Big 12 game the rest of that season. Haven't since, frankly. And Utah still lacks a conference counter, an official conference win at home. Houston beat Utah last season. Look, the only win Utah has in the Big 12 since that game is a road win against UCF, and they fired their coach the next day. UCF did. And I look at this and say, like, I think it's still as good as they looked on Saturday and as dominant as the performance that was. We just said that a year ago about Utah, and we saw how that year went. And I'm not saying it's going to go that far south for Tech. Tech has invested a lot in their college football program, as anyone and everyone would like to, right? I just look at it like, okay, it's September. There was a point in that game for 2.5 quarters where it felt like really close, and then it didn't for a second. Let's pump the brakes for a second. Meanwhile, on the inverse, like I think TCU also looks good. We talk about Iowa State a lot. I like Iowa State as a program. Campbell's a good coach, but like TCU, and for whatever you think about Sonny Dykes, I don't need to go on what I think about Sonny Dykes. They seem to be winning games. Second powerful win in the non-conference. Whatever you think about North Carolina, I guess we'll get to them in a second too. It feels like Hoover and McAllister have a real connection for them. They beat SMU over the weekend in much more dominant fashion than Baylor did with a come from behind victory in overtime. Central Florida beat Carolina. Scott Frost, I don't think the whole freezing over thing is working necessarily, but they beat Bill Belichick in a great non-conference win for the Big 12 as well. And I leave the weekend as all schools head into conference play, or most schools are heading into conference play. I guess obviously Houston playing Oregon State, having already played Colorado. The Big 12 is 6-1 against the ACC, 2-2 against the Big 10, and while they are 0-3 against the SEC, Arizona State probably should have beat Mississippi State and couldn't quite close it out at the buzzer on the road. And Kansas did get up early on Missouri. Baylor did the Baylor thing, but that's how that goes sometimes too. The only Big 12 loss to the ACC was a Georgia Tech win over Colorado. Georgia Tech gave Georgia all they could handle last season. And the two losses to the Big Ten were Oklahoma State and Cincinnati. Both of them may fire the coaches in the next 4 or 5 days, maybe the next couple of weeks, if not the next couple of months. Those coaches are done at those programs, and that's the Big Ten wins over the Big 12 this season. And even when you add in Notre Dame wins to some of these other teams, because Notre Dame's 0-3 and has played the other three power conferences, that still leaves the Big 12 at second in wins against other power conferences thus far this season. They also rank second in losses to group of six, and least groups of losses to group of six schools amongst the Power Four conferences. And look, there's a big swing in the rankings here as far as conference is going to go. Miami and Florida State are both ACC schools, both in the top 10. They do play each other in a couple weeks. October 4th, actually, the same day that Houston plays Texas Tech. And Florida State still in the top 10. They had a couple layup games since beating Alabama on national TV, but other people from them have lost too. So we get to see those two teams play it out. So theoretically, one ACC team will probably be in the top 10 after that one. I don't imagine the other one to stay in the top 10. I just look at this as a really, we talked about it going into it in the non-conference era for the Big 12. It was a really, really strong showing in non-conference football by and large for the Big 12. Would winning one or two or all three of those SEC games have been nice? Yes, it would have, Baylor. Thank you. Would have been nice. But by and large, really strong showing out of these Big 12 schools in their non-conference Power 4 opponents. Technically, for what it's worth, Oregon State was supposed to be a non-conference Power 5 opponent back when it got scheduled for Houston. They were supposed to be getting on the party here for a second. And while for Houston's sake and getting a win, I don't mind that Oregon's at a down part of their program because of what happened. What happened does suck. I don't want to act like it doesn't, but I'll take wins where you can find them. Houston's got to go work hard and take one this week. I think that's a good sign for the Big 12. And as a Houston fan, when you'd been left out of the big Power 4, Power 5 conference party for so long, obviously the Big 12 is always the one you wanted, but it makes you feel good about the one you got into, right? That it's the one doing so much better right now as it stands, right? I mean, the ACC is far, it has two great teams in it, and the rest of them ain't, right? SMU might be third. They lost two Big 12 teams in the non-conference, right? Clemson might be, and they almost lost to Troy, right? Like the ACC is pretty far behind this thing. And so it makes you feel good about where you're at enjoying the Big 12 and where the conference is at as far as the future of college football goes. It feels like you can't leave out the Big 12 right now. And that's interesting. So we look at end of year, how many bids do you get, how many bids don't, et cetera. The Big 12 is making a pretty strong push to get a second bid in the college football playoff, especially in a year where there might be talk about a second group of 5 school. There's just so many good group of 5 schools out there right now. I mean, North Texas is 4-0. What? Right? Lots of options out there, right? So be checking in on that as things unfold. Obviously, that's mostly wrapped up at this point, though, so we'll see how rankings come out as they go. The AP polls are out, obviously, but I just mean as Big 12 schools continue to climb them over the course of the season, we'll be following the Big 12 as Houston Cougar fans, the Houston Cougar eye on it very, very closely. Now, hoops recruiting, big news over the weekend. Yes, one might have gotten away, but one might not. And I want to talk about that in 1 second. Before we get too far, though, today's show is brought to you, as mentioned, by our buddies over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because NFL season's here. Someone should wake up the Houston Texans and tell them. FanDuel's making sure that you get ready for kickoff with can't-miss offers. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. If your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to bet across the app. If you think Houston is going to score a touchdown, the Texans, that is, power to you. If you can figure out who it's going to be, you can go to FanDuel and make some money on that action. If you can figure out what the score is going to be, go make some money on that action. If you figure out who they're going to draft first pick overall, because it feels like that's what the Houston Texans are bound to do, find some action on it at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. If you are ready to play, download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.